With more, we're now joined by the Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, Marc Miller. Minister, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Michael.
Now, ahead of your annual progress report, we did hear from the Native Women's Association, and when addressing your government's response to the missing and murdered calls to action, they described federal efforts, at this point at least, as a failure. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't think we're where we really should be as a country or as a government, Michael. This is a tragedy that's ongoing. I don't think it's gotten better, and in fact, it's probably gotten measurably worse since coming out of COVID for Indigenous women and girls and members of the LGBT community that are much more vulnerable than someone like me when they walk the streets of a city or anywhere else in this country. And we do absolutely need to do more. Part of the response that the federal government, the federal pathway that the government has put forward, is to issue a yearly report that shows progress. What I've tried to do this year, contrary to past years, is really to tie that progress into specific calls for justice, because really people want those calls for justice answered and explained if we're not answering them. And so there's an effort in transparency at this time of year to make sure people actually see what's going on and see, what is going well, what's going badly, and anywhere in between. I think where we've seen progress is, obviously the massive investments the government has put, my own department has put $100 million into infrastructure, into creating safe spaces around communities. Those will save lives. But looking at the structural aspects of answering the final report into missing and murdering Indigenous women and girls, which isn't about a tragedy and a policy-based response to tragedy, which usually yields tragic results, but looking at a comprehensive response to human safety and security, health, identity, and culture. And those are very much long-term things. This is not a tick-the-box operation. It is something that will take years and perhaps a generation to make sure that we fully answer these calls. But staying on top of that and making sure that we have accountability, which, remember, coming out of last year's report was something that we've heard loud and clear from Indigenous advocates, families, and survivors, to make sure that actually the government is being held to account. Everyone knows we've put $2 billion in, but they don't know where the money's going, and they want to see results. And so this year, putting forward Jennifer Moore-Rattray to put in place a system where we have an ombudsperson will actually be key to that accountability that people are looking for.
Okay, so putting billions forward, creating a more transparency and accountability process, as you say, but why hasn't there been more concrete progress made at this point? It's been 4 years since the missing and murdered report came out, was actually tabled.
Well, I think, Michael, to suggest that nothing has been done is to misunderstand exactly, one, the problem that we're facing, but also the work that's been done by so many Indigenous advocates and survivor-based organizations that 4 years ago weren't getting any money from the federal government and now have consistent funding from the federal government and systems in place to make sure that is recurring on a yearly basis. I just made announcements with Minister Lametti on Indigenous liaison units, which are so key for families wanting to seek answers. But this is a process that will be ongoing, and to think that this will be complete after 4 years is to completely, as you know, misunderstand the problem. Over the weekend, I met with the family of Tootsie, Jimmy, Charlie, that came all the way from the Yukon to speak to me about their mother, who was discovered in again, a dump 55 years ago. The pain is still alive, the pain is still raw, and they still want answers. So the worst thing we can do as a government is to lie to Canadians and tell them that everything is going to be better and everything is going to be fine and it's all going to be over tomorrow. It isn't. It's a problem. It's a tragedy. Any government that wants to be taken seriously in this space needs to act accordingly.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say the positive impact has been then, beyond the money and the process that you're setting up, in terms of concrete change? Even if a call to action has not been completed or call to justice has not been met 100%, what can you point to as, I can be proud of the work I've done there?
This isn't about my personal pride, Michael. I have a very important job that the Prime Minister has given to me, and a big runway to land a lot of large planes on, and that's what we're trying to do as a government. I look at the settlement that we have for Child and Family Services about eliminating Canada's discrimination for children, Indigenous children in care. That is a massive game changer. The courts have highlighted as much. That'll actually save lives. I think all of Canadians should be proud of it, because that's what pushed us to do it. It wasn't governments. We got pushed to do it, and we had to answer the call. And so that's something that I think Canadians can look to, and particularly the most vulnerable segment of society, Indigenous children, that will be better served than they have been even a year ago. And so those things are changing. What I've certainly heard from my informal reports back from Jennifer Moore-Rattray is there is hope. Very little faith, but there is hope because people are seeing things change and seeing some progress. But it is slow, and like any tragedy, we have to move quicker.
Okay, need to move quicker. Is that then a priority for the next 12 months? Where would you like to see movement before the next progress report?
I'd like to see movement on the accountability portion that we've heard quite clearly needs to be moved on. The putting into place of an ombudsperson that can really hold people to account. That $2 billion, it's very hard. People don't trust the government, so they want to be able to have a third person that can see where those monies are going, where that progress is being made. And I want to I'd like to see people safe. I'd like people to feel like when they walk around, they are not vulnerable to going missing and often murder, and that's the case still in this country. I'd like to see, frankly, and I guess it sort of goes outside my job description, but it is a big chunk of what I do, awareness among the rest of Canada, non-Indigenous Canada, about what those challenges are. This isn't just about Indigenous women. It's about the role of males in perpetuating that violence and a system that has created and been put into place by Canada to perpetuate that violence. There's still very little understanding about what that is in the country. And sadly, despite the tragedy and the horror, this in the public consciousness is sort of a niche area, and that's unfortunate because this is a whole of government, federal, provincial, territorial, but also individuals in how they raise their own children, and that family responsibility among non-Indigenous Canada is very, very important to raise awareness on.
Well, I'm wondering if you might then agree with, again, going back to the Native Women Association of Canada, because you're noting the fact that, yes, this is an ongoing issue, and this requires a whole-of-country approach. So the association is calling on the Trudeau government to declare a state of national emergency here to essentially expedite a whole-of-Canada response. Would you support that?
Well, we've acknowledged that in the House of Commons, Michael. As the question when we do that is, a lot of what goes on in the House of Commons is important, but it's actually what goes on in the streets that counts. And this is a national tragedy. I've acknowledged it. Members of my government have acknowledged it by standing up in the House of Commons and voting for that particular motion. But what people want to see is action. I think the worst thing, a larger betrayal, would be to do nothing. And we've, in this particular last budget cycle, put significant amounts in making sure that we respond in the way the federal government should to this crisis, and we need to continue investing in that. And I think people won't trust us until they actually see the results.
Minister Marc Miller, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Michael.